Hi everybody, you want to draw minimum wage and the impact a minimum wage will have on a labour market. We can draw it very simply. I'm going to draw that here on the top left, but we can also evaluate the idea of implementing a minimum wage in three ways. We can look at implementing a minimum wage in a monopsony labour market and when the demand and supply of labour curves are inelastic and elastic looking. So these three are evaluation based. This one is the basic one. Let's start with the basic one first. This is very simple. It's a labour market, so we have wage on the y-axis and we have quantity of workers on the x-axis. All we draw is a very simple supply of labour and demand for labour, and that is equal to the MRP. Where the two meet, we have a quantity. I want to call that QC, the competitive quantity, and WC, competitive wage. And you just need to show minimum wage being set above this equilibrium quantity wage. So a flat line like that, that is a wage floor, and you want to label that minimum wage here, so minimum wage. That's great, and on the y-axis just call it W min. Not finished just yet. It's very clear to see an excess supply of labour here. You want to shade that in and show that you know it, and label that excess supply or just label it unemployment. Then we're done with this diagram. And that's quite an important diagram. It's very simple, but very powerful in what it shows, both helping you on the one hand with your theory and on the other hand with some of your evaluation points. What about monopsony? If you want to show how a minimum wage might be implemented in a monopsony, what do? Well, you start by drawing your monopsony and labour market. Wage on the y-axis, quantity of workers on the x-axis. Draw your monopsony labour market first. Supply of labour, which is equal to the average cost of labour. Marginal cost of labour twice as steep above it and upward sloping. And a demand for labour equal to MRP. What you want to draw are two equilibria. You want to draw the competitive equilibrium first, the QC and WC, and you find that where supply meets demand. The next thing you want to draw is the monopsony quantity and wage. You find that where MRP is equal to the marginal cost of labour. That gives us QM, and the wage we read off the supply curve of WM. And all you need to do is to show how a minimum wage can actually be beneficial and can create jobs as well as increase wages. You would put the minimum wage at the competitive wage. Okay, that's a good thing to do on this diagram. And then you'll label that minimum wage. So you make the point that the minimum wage in a monopsony labour market, if set at the competitive wage rate, could increase wages and it could increase the quantity of workers. So you make that clear by drawing these two arrows on your diagram. That's quite a powerful diagram and a good one to use in your essays for evaluation. So that's how you draw that one. These two are just to evaluate the level of unemployment if demand and supply are inelastic or elastic. So on this diagram we're going to draw steep looking supply and demand curves for labour. So again on the y-axis we have wage. Always label your axis first. Don't rush in. And we have quantity of workers. It's one of the most common mistakes I see, guys. You know, students know what they're trying to do and what they're trying to draw, but they forget the basics, labeling the axis, in which case the diagram is redundant. So inelastics, we want to draw them steep, so we can draw supply and demand, something like that. We'll call that supply of labour. We'll call that demand for labour, DL, which is equal to MRP. Where the two meet, we have competitive quantity and we have the competitive wage, call it WC. But now minimum wage is introduced, show exactly what we showed above, call that minimum wage. And on the y-axis, like before, call that W min. What we can now see is that the level of unemployment is much less. We can label that unemployment, but what you would do in your essays is compare that to normal, and you can see how it's slightly less than above, and that's the point. When there is inelastic demand and supply, the amount of unemployment caused by minimum wage is actually much less. Vice versa when demand and supply are elastic. So again, we label our axis, wage and quantity of workers. Good habits. And now you want to draw your demand and supply curves quite shallow. So again, do it quite extreme so you make the point. So quite shallow looking. Supply of labour and demand for labour, which is equal to MRP. What you want to draw now, guys, is your competitive wage and quantity, and then you want to stick on your minimum wage somewhere there. So let's call that the minimum wage. Okay, and on the axis, you can call it here W min. I've just run out of space, but W min like that. And what we can now shade in is the excess supply, the unemployment, which we can see compared to both the inelastic diagram and the normal diagram. We can see it's much greater area. So that's how you can draw minimum wages in a variety of forms, whether simplistic in a monopsony with elastic or inelastic looking demand and supply curves for labour. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Make sure you nail this and you can draw them all. Make sure we label all the axes, the curves and the equilibria. I'll see you in the next video.